She didn't leave her abusive husband because of fear. She left because of something worse. Her mother told her to stay, and she almost died listening. There are wounds that doctors can stitch closed. Broken ribs, ruptured organs, fractured bones. Yaa survived all of those. What nearly destroyed her was something no surgeon could fix. The voice of her own mother whispering, "Endure." Her name is Yaa, and this is the story of how her mother's love almost became her funeral. There are women who teach their daughters how to cook, how to pray, how to plait hair on a Sunday morning before church. And then there are women who teach their daughters something else entirely. Something that has no name, because naming it would require admitting it exists. Akosua Mansa taught her daughter how to be quiet. Not politely quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from having nothing to say. The kind of quiet that is swallowed slowly over years. The kind that sits at the back of the throat like something that never fully went down. Akosua had learned it from her own mother, who had learned it from hers, and by the time it reached Yaa, it had been refined so completely that it no longer looked like pain. It looked like grace. This is a story about what that grace cost. Yaa Asante was born on a Thursday in 1991 in a government hospital in Kumasi during a power cut. Her mother always said that the darkness that greeted her should have been a sign. She said it laughing, but she said it. That is the kind of woman Akosua was. Truth wrapped in humor so you couldn't hold it against her. Yaa grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Adun, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew your business but pretended they didn't, where the smell of kontomire stew drifted between compounds in the evenings and children were sent to bed when adult conversations began. She was the eldest of 3, a position that meant everything in her family. It meant she set the example. It meant she carried the standard. It meant her failures were louder than other people's failures, and her silence was not optional. Her father, Emmanuel Asante, was not a violent man. That is important to say, because this story is not about violence as the only shape cruelty takes. Emmanuel was a man who was simply absent, emotionally, reliably absent. He came home, he ate, he slept, he left. He provided, technically. He never asked his wife how she was, not once in 33 years of marriage, and Akosua had stopped expecting him to before Yaa was old enough to walk. What Yaa watched growing up was her mother managing, adjusting, shrinking herself into whatever shape the house required on a given day. She watched her mother smooth over Emmanuel's moods at the dinner table, redirect conversations away from anything that might cause friction, apologize for things that were not her fault with a fluency that suggested she had long stopped calculating blame. Yaa watched all of this and filed it under, "This is what love looks like." She did not know then that she was taking notes. She was a bright girl. Teachers at her school in Adum said she had a particular kind of intelligence, not loud but precise. She asked the right questions. She remembered everything. When she got into the University of Ghana at Legon to study public administration, her mother cried in the kitchen where she sat with her daughter. Proud tears, yes, but also something else. Something that looked, if you watched closely, like grief. As though Akosua understood on some level that education was a door, and she was not sure she wanted her daughter walking through it too fast. Legon changed Yaa, the way it changes most people who arrive from smaller lives. She made friends from Accra, from Takoradi, from the northern region, girls who argued about politics over rice and stew, who wore their opinions like clothing, who did not shrink when men spoke over them. For the first time in her life, Yaa felt the edges of herself expand. She started speaking in class. She started disagreeing carefully at first, then with more confidence. She started understanding that the quiet her mother had given her was not a gift. It was an inheritance she had not chosen. She met Kofi, a German, in her second year.
I'm sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going.
It's fine, don't worry.
Kofi was the kind of man that mothers pointed to when talking about what a good match looked like. He was finishing his MBA. His family was from Labone, the kind of address that carried its own punctuation. His father had a name in Accra's business circles. Kofi himself was handsome in a composed way, the kind of handsome that comes from always being told you are. He dressed well, he spoke well. He had a car, which at 26 years old at Legon meant something. He pursued Ya with a patience that she mistook for depth. He remembered what she told him. He asked about her family, her ambitions, her childhood. He showed up when he said he would. In the early months, he was generous, not ostentatiously, but quietly, which she found more convincing. He introduced her to his friends as though she were someone worth being seen with. He made her feel for the first time that her intelligence was something a man could want rather than tolerate. When she brought him home to Kumasi for the first time, Akosua made beans and fried plantain and wore her good dress. After he left, she pulled Ya aside and said, "Hold on to that one." Ya was already planning to. They dated for 2 years. During that time, there were signs. There are always signs, and this is not said to blame anyone who missed them, because the signs do not arrive wearing labels. They arrive wrapped in reasonable explanations, in apologies that feel genuine, in moments so warm they make you doubt the cold ones. The first sign was the way Kofi responded when Ya got a competitive internship at a development organization in Accra, one she had applied for without telling him because she had wanted to be sure first. He smiled when she told him, he congratulated her, and then over the following days, he asked questions whose frequency told a different story. Why didn't you mention you are applying? What kind of hours? Will there be male colleagues? Why is this the first I'm hearing of it? The questions were calm. They did not raise voices, but they built a structure around her decision until it felt like something she had done wrong. She turned down the internship. She told herself it was her choice. The second sign was the way Kofi dissolved conflict, not into anger, but into a cold and total withdrawal. When they argued, Kofi did not fight back. He simply left, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally, and stayed gone until Ya, confused and anxious, came to find him and make it right. It did not occur to her for a long time that she was always the one who came back first. It did not occur to her that he had engineered the silence to guarantee exactly that. The third sign was the night he grabbed her wrist at a friend's gathering because she laughed too long at something another man said. He grabbed it hard under the table where no one could see, and he smiled the entire time. He told her later that she had been embarrassing him.
What was that all about? Do you know how embarrassing that was?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you.
Well, you did.
She believed him. She told no one. They married in December 2018 at a ceremony in Accra that people talked about for months afterward. The kente was correct. The bride price was generous. The reception was held at a hotel in cantonments, and the food did not run out, which in Accra is its own kind of victory. Ya's friends from Legon danced around her in a circle at one point in the evening, and there's a photograph from that moment. Someone caught it without her knowing, where she is laughing with her whole face, uninhibited, entirely herself. She would think about that photograph later, about the woman in it. Akosua wept through the entire ceremony. Happy tears, she said. She held Ya's hands before they walked into the reception hall and told her, "You are going to a good family. Respect his people. Keep your home. Whatever happens inside your marriage, handle it inside." She said it with such practiced certainty that it did not sound like instruction. It sounded like love. It was the most important thing she would ever say to her daughter, and it was wrong. The first year of the marriage was not the worst year. This is the thing that is hardest to explain to people who have not lived it, that the descent is gradual, that there are good months, that the man who hurts you is also sometimes the man who makes you coffee the way you like it, who holds you when you are sick, who makes you laugh on a Tuesday evening over nothing. The two versions of him exist simultaneously, and for a long time you spend your energy trying to figure out which one is real. They moved into an apartment in East Legon. Kofi was working at his father's logistics company by then, and Ya had found a position at a government agency. For a while, the structure of ordinary life held things together. They were busy, they were building, there were dinners with friends, weekends in Kumasi visiting family, plans made and argued over and revised, normal things. But the control tightened, slowly enough that each increment felt manageable. He began monitoring her phone, not dramatically, not with accusations, but by picking it up casually, glancing at it, and then watching her face for any sign of discomfort. He began tracking her movements through questions whose pattern she only noticed in retrospect. When did you leave the office? Who dropped you? Why did it take that long? He began making comments about her appearance that were phrased as concern. You're wearing that outside. You don't think it's a bit much? Small things, reasonable sounding things. And then, in the 14th month of their marriage, he hit her for the first time. It was a Saturday morning. She had made a comment about money, a practical comment about the budget for the month, nothing accusatory, and something in him shifted in a way she had not seen before. He was across the kitchen in 3 steps. It was an open palm against her left cheek. It lasted less than a second. And then he was standing there, looking at his own hand, and she was standing there, looking at him. He cried before she did.
I don't know how this happened. I'm under a lot of pressure at work. My father had been difficult, and I've not slept well in days.
He held her face in both hands and said her name like it was something he was trying not to lose. She held him while he apologized, which is the part that would confuse her most when she looked back, that her instinct was to comfort him. She did not call her mother. She told herself it would not happen again. It happened again, and again after that. The pattern, once established, followed its own logic. A period of calm, sometimes days, sometimes weeks. Then a build-up she learned to detect like weather. A tightness in his jaw, a shortness in his responses, the way he would stop looking at her directly. Then the incident itself, varying in severity, always with a reason. Her fault, someone else's fault, circumstances. And then the aftermath, which was almost the most disorienting part, because the aftermath was tenderness. Genuine seeming tenderness, gifts, attention, the return of the version of him she had married. It is a cycle that has a name, though Ya did not have the name for it then. By the end of the 2nd year, she had become an expert at 2 things, hiding bruises and explaining absences. She wore long sleeves in weather that didn't warrant them. She cancelled plans with friends using excuses that were plausible but never specific. She became skilled at the kind of performance that does not look like a performance, at seeming fine so completely that people stopped looking for evidence that she wasn't. Her mother called every Sunday. Akosua Mansa was a faithful caller, the kind of Ghanaian mother who equated communication frequency with relationship health. She called at 10 in the morning, after church if she had been, and she spoke for 30 minutes about the neighborhood, about Ya's siblings, about church politics and what so-and-so's daughter was up to. Ya learned to match her mother's register, cheerful, superficial, safe. She learned to give her nothing that could lead anywhere. And Akosua, who had spent 30 years not looking too closely at her own life, did not look too closely at her daughter's. There is a particular kind of suffering that becomes invisible because the person suffering has become too skilled at containing it. By the time Ya called her mother, the first real call, the one where the mask slipped, She had been living inside the marriage for nearly 4 years. It was a night week. Kofi was away in Takoradi for work. She had told herself she just wanted to hear a familiar voice, that she wasn't going to say anything, that she would talk about ordinary things and then hang up and feel slightly less alone. She did not plan to cry. It happened the moment her mother picked up and said "ya" in the particular way that only a mother says her name, as though the name itself contains everything the child ever was. She cried for a long time without speaking. Akosua waited, which was perhaps the most maternal thing she did in this entire story. And then Ya told her. Not everything, not the full shape of it, but enough.
Things are hard, Mama. Kofi has a bad temper and it scares me sometimes. I'm afraid. I don't know what to do.
The silence on Akosua's end lasted long enough that Ya thought the call had dropped. And then her mother spoke. She spoke carefully, which is to say she chose her words in a way that revealed how much she had already thought about this possibility. She said that marriage was not what people showed in their faces outside, that every home had its struggles. She said that Kofi was a good provider, that his family was decent, that Ya had not been suffering long enough to know what suffering looked like. She said, and this is the sentence that would live in Ya for the rest of her life, marriage is suffering. We all endure it. Don't bring shame to this family by leaving. She did not ask how bad it was. She did not ask where the bruises were. She asked Ya to pray, and she prayed with her over the phone, and when she was done, she said, "You are a strong woman, Ya. You come from strong women. Handle your home." Ya said, "Yes, Mom." She hung up the phone and sat on the bedroom floor for a very long time. What does it do to a person to reach for the one hand that should always be there and find it closed? There is grief in that moment that has no comparison. It is not the grief of losing a stranger. It is the grief of discovering that the person who was supposed to be your first safety was never going to be that. That the love was real but insufficient. That you had been failed by someone who believed genuinely that they were helping you. Ya did not hate her mother that night. She wanted to. It would have been cleaner. Instead, she felt something more complicated, a sorrow that included understanding, which is perhaps the worst kind. She understood where her mother's words came from. She could trace the lineage of every sentence back through generations of Ghanaian women who had been told the same thing, who had swallowed themselves whole for the sake of a family name and been praised for it. Understanding did not make it survivable. She went back into the marriage. She stayed another year. By the 5th year, Kofi had stopped being careful. This is the progression that those who study these patterns describe with clinical precision, the gradual erosion of inhibition as control becomes more total. He had learned thoroughly that Ya would not leave. He had tested the boundary and found it held, and so the incident grew less calculated, less contained. He hit her in places that were harder to hide. He broke things, a plate once, a mirror twice, a door she had been standing behind. He said things that were designed not just to hurt, but to erase, that she was nothing outside of what he had given her, that no one would want her, that she had no life that wasn't his, that she should be grateful. She stopped eating the way she used to. She lost weight that people noticed but didn't ask about. She stopped calling her Legon friends not because she had decided to, but because she no longer had the energy to maintain 2 performances simultaneously. The performance of the good wife and the performance of the fine friend. Something had to go. At work, she functioned. This surprised her later, that she could sit in meetings and write reports and respond to emails while her private life was disintegrating. It is a strange resilience, the kind that comes not from strength, but from compartmentalization so complete it becomes its own form of dissociation. She called her mother a second time, shorter this time. She did not cry. She stated facts in a flat voice, that Kofi had put his hands around her neck the previous week, that she had blacked out briefly, that she was frightened. Akosua breathed in sharply on the other end, and then she said, "Yeah, divorce courts in Accra are not kind to women who cannot prove their case. His family has lawyers. Think of what you are saying. Going to the police would only make things worse." She said that if Ya could just be smarter about what she said and did at home, that sometimes women provoked these things without realizing. She said that she would light candles at church on Sunday. Ya said nothing. She hung up. She did not call again. What Ya did instead was begin to plan. This is the part that people sometimes miss when they think about women in these situations, that survival is not passive, that it requires a calculus of risk that would exhaust anyone. She began quietly moving small amounts of money. She located a women's support organization, the Women's Resource Center in Adabraka, through a flyer she had seen once and never forgotten, and she called their number from her office phone one afternoon. The woman who answered was named Efwa.
"We are always here to help you. You don't have to be ready yet. But call me when you are."
Ya was not ready yet. The night it finally happened was a Thursday in October, the kind of evening where the sky over Accra turns a deep orange before dark, the kind of sky that in another life she would have stopped to look at. Kofi came home different. She felt it before she saw it, a disturbance in the texture of the air, the particular silence that preceded the worst versions of him. She tried to make herself small. She tried to give him nothing to catch on. She does not remember exactly what the precipitating moment was. She has thought about it many times and cannot locate it precisely, which the counselor she would see later told her was normal, that the brain, in extremity, sometimes edits. What she remembers is the flaw, the particular pattern of the tiles in their kitchen. She remembers being very cold, which she will later understand was shock. She remembers the sound of her neighbor's television through the wall, a program with canned laughter, which struck her even then as obscene. She remembers trying to stand and being unable to. Her neighbor came, not because she heard the incident. Kofi was skilled enough by then at keeping the sounds interior, but because she had knocked to ask for a favor, and something in the quality of the silence behind the door made her knock again and keep knocking. She opened the door when no one answered. Ya spent 11 days at Kolebu Teaching Hospital. A ruptured spleen, 2 broken ribs, a fractured cheekbone, internal bleeding that the doctors addressed in surgery and described afterward with a precision that made it sound manageable when it had not been manageable at all. She drifted in and out the first 2 days. When she was fully conscious on the 3rd day, the first face she saw clearly was a nurse who was adjusting her IV drip. The nurse looked at her and said, "You are still here." She said it as a fact, as though Ya needed to hear the statement from someone outside her own head. She did. Akosua arrived on the 3rd day. She had been called by Ya's brother, who had been called by Efwa, who had been called by the neighbor. Akosua came with food in containers and a second set of clothes, and the expression of a woman who has been running towards something and does not yet know if she has arrived too late. She sat by the bed. She wept. The tears were not performed. They came from somewhere real in her, from a love that was genuine, even when it had been disastrously insufficient. She held Ya's hand. She said her name over and over quietly. At some point, she spoke.
"I'm sorry things got this far.
this far. 2 words that carried inside them a whole philosophy of how she understood what had happened. Not, I am sorry I told you to stay. Not, I was wrong. But, I am sorry things escalated to a level that even I cannot defend. Ya heard it. She heard the precise weight of those 2 words. She looked at the ceiling, which is where she kept her face for most of her mother's visit, and she said nothing. She let her mother hold her hand. She memorized the feeling of it, not for sentiment, but for farewell. Efua came on the 5th day. She brought nothing except herself and a small notebook, and a steadiness that Ya would try to describe later and find she couldn't. It was not warmth exactly. It was more like solidity, like being in the presence of someone who had decided that nothing you said would move them to judgment. They spoke for a long time. Efua explained what could be done, what resources existed, what a path forward could look like. She did not push, she did not persuade. She laid out the information the way you lay out tools and let the person decide which one to pick up. On the 12th day, Ya was discharged. She did not go back to the apartment in East Legon. Efua had arranged a transitional house, a quiet place in a part of Accra that Kofi did not know, with 3 other women who moved around each other with a careful respect. Ya slept for the first 3 days in a way she had not slept in years, not peacefully, but deeply, as though her body was settling a debt. The legal process took months. Kofi contested. His family's lawyers were what Akosua had said they would be, but the hospital records were what they were, and the neighbor was what she was, a woman who had come to ask for a favor and could not unknow what she had seen. And eventually, the courts were what the law required them to be. She filed, she waited, she survived the wait. 6 months after leaving the hospital, Ya left Ghana. A fellowship she applied for, carefully, quietly, without telling anyone who might tell Kofi, came through. A public policy research position in the UK. She took it with both hands. The morning she left, she stood at the airport departure gate and felt something she could not immediately name. It took her a while to identify it because it was so unfamiliar as to be almost unrecognizable. It was the absence of fear. Not the replacement by happiness. It was not that simple, not yet. Just the absence of the thing that had lived in her chest for 5 years as a permanent weather. She boarded the plane. She did not call her mother to say goodbye. Akosua called, of course, regularly at first, then with the increased frequency of a woman who senses a door closing and does not understand why. She left messages with Ya's brother. She sent messages through aunties. She sent once a long voice note that Ya listened to fully and once only. Akosua crying, saying she had done what she thought was right, saying she had not known, saying she missed her daughter. Ya listened to it while sitting in a flat in London on a grey November morning. She put the phone down. She did not reply. This is the part of the story that makes people uncomfortable. More uncomfortable sometimes than the abuse itself. People want a reconciliation. They want the mother to apologize fully and the daughter to accept and the relationship to be rebuilt on honest ground. People want this because it is more comfortable than the alternative, which is the truth, that some damage does not heal into reunion, that some silences are not cruelty, but self-preservation. That Ya made a choice not from bitterness, or not only from bitterness, but from the clear-eyed understanding that her mother's love would always be structured around the same values that had nearly killed her. That to go back was to return to a place where she would always be told to endure. And she had decided, finally, irrevocably, that she was done enduring. 2 years later, her brother reached out. He was careful about it. He had grown into someone who understood nuance, or was trying to. He said simply that her mother asked about her, that she was not well, that he was not asking Ya to forgive, only to know. Ya read the message on a Tuesday evening after work. She sat with it for a long time. She replied with 4 words, "I know she is." And she put the phone in her bag and went to make her dinner, and outside her window, London was doing what it does in autumn, shedding everything, quietly, without apology. And she stood at the stove and cooked a meal for one. And the kitchen smelled briefly like something from childhood, something warm and irretrievable. And she let herself feel that for exactly as long as the onions softened. Then she turned up the heat and kept going. This is not a story of a monster. Akosua Mansa loved her daughter. She loved her with the full measure of a love that had been shaped by its own silences, its own swallowed pain, its own inherited belief that a woman's endurance was her highest virtue. She had survived her own marriage by going still inside it, and she looked at her daughter and taught her to do the same, the way you pass on the only map you have, not stopping to ask whether it leads anywhere worth going. She was wrong. She was wrong in ways that had consequences. She was wrong in ways that Yad nearly did not survive. And she was not a monster. She was a woman who had been failed by the same silence she passed on, and she passed it on faithfully, because that is what unchallenged inheritances do. They travel. The question this story leaves, the one that does not have a clean answer, is what we do with a love that is real but harmful. Whether it can be held and refused simultaneously, whether forgiveness is owed to people who hurt us without intending to. Ya decided that it was not. You may decide differently, but Ya made her life, carefully, deliberately, in a city where no one knew her history, where accountability to no legacy, where silence was a choice and not a requirement. She made it, she kept it, and it was hers.